Some children dream of being astronauts. Others just dream of helping their parents survive. The sun hadn't even fully risen when Sophie Miller, a 7-year-old girl with trembling hands and oversized shoes, stood outside the towering glass facade of SummitCore Industries. She looked impossibly small against the 50-story building, an image that would stop anyone in their tracks if they were paying attention. But no one was. Not yet. She clutched a worn leather portfolio, her father's. Its edges were cracked, stitched together with tape and hope. Inside, his resume, and a letter she couldn't read without crying. A letter he had written the night before, with shaking fingers, from a hospital bed. He had whispered, "If they don't meet me, maybe they'll meet you." Sophie had nodded, too brave for her age, too silent for her heart. The revolving doors whooshed open. She stepped inside. The marble lobby gleamed. People in sharp suits rushed past, coffee cups in hand, earpieces buzzing. Sophie took a deep breath and walked up to the front desk. She had to stand on tiptoes to see over it. "Excuse me," she said, voice soft but steady. "I have a 9 a.m. appointment with Mr. Michael Anderson." The receptionist blinked. "Sweetie, are you here with your parent?" Sophie opened the portfolio, slid out the letter, and placed it on the desk. "My dad can't come. He's really sick. But he's smart and strong and used to work 12 hours a day. I just need someone to give him a chance." The room fell quiet, at least for a moment. The receptionist, Karen, hesitated. She glanced at the letter. It was neatly folded, words typed, signature at the bottom. The ink had smudged slightly, maybe from tears. "Wait here," she said, voice catching in her throat. Upstairs, in a sun-drenched corner office lined with awards and thick glass walls, Michael Anderson, the CEO of SummitCore, reviewed quarterly numbers. His suit was perfect. His expression wasn't. Cold. Precise. Alone. He was the kind of man who had stopped believing in touching stories. To him, business was numbers. Emotions were distractions. Sentimentality was weakness. But when Karen knocked and handed him the letter, something shifted. She didn't explain. Just said, "You should read this." He did. Then paused. Then read it again. It wasn't the grammar or layout that held him, it was the honesty. The desperation. And finally, the child's handwriting scrawled across the bottom. "Please help my dad. I can wait while you read. Sophie." He looked down through his office window. And there she was. A tiny figure in a too-big cardigan, sitting on the lobby bench, swinging her legs and clutching the portfolio like it was sacred. "She came here alone?" he asked. Karen nodded. "Took the subway. Asked 3 people for directions." Michael stood abruptly. Something in his chest stirred. A memory? A conscience? He didn't know yet. But he pressed the intercom. "Bring her up." Sophie entered the elevator wide-eyed. She smoothed her dress, checked the ribbon in her hair. The ride felt endless. At the top floor, doors opened to silence. Michael met her at the threshold. Not with a smile. Not with authority. Just curiosity. "You must be Sophie," he said. She nodded. "Are you Mr. Anderson?" "I am." She stepped forward, holding out her hand like she'd seen adults do in movies. "Nice to meet you, sir." He shook it, stunned by how small it was. "Why did you come?" he asked gently. Sophie took a breath, then answered, clear, honest, brave. "My daddy's sick. We don't have much left. He used to fix machines, even the big kind. He says your company needs people like him. He wrote everything in there." She held up the folder. "I'm just here so someone reads it." Michael didn't speak right away. Because this was not business as usual. Sometimes a resume can't show what really matters, like how hard someone's fighting just to live. The boardroom was quiet, too large for two people. Sophie sat at the far end of a long, glossy table, feet dangling, hands folded in her lap. Her eyes scanned the space. So many chairs. So much silence. Across from her, Michael Anderson sat with the folder open, pretending to read. But really, he was trying to understand why this child had walked into his life. 1 week earlier. In a small apartment 2 train rides away, David Miller coughed into a napkin that turned red. He turned his face so Sophie wouldn't see. But she did. She always did. Their home was simple: cracked tiles, second-hand furniture, and a little whiteboard on the fridge that read, "Job interview, SummitCore. Don't forget to bring the toolbox." David had once been a machine technician, sharp, quick, reliable. He was the guy who could fix an engine by ear. But illness had slowed him. Bills piled up like junk mail. Still, every morning he smiled at Sophie and packed her lunch before she left for school. Sophie's backpack was too heavy, but she never complained. Not once. Because when she looked at her dad, all she saw was someone who kept trying even as the world kept saying no. One night, she sat on the floor drawing. David watched, weak but proud. "What are you making?" he asked. "A company logo," she grinned. "When we start our own one day." He chuckled. "You'll be the boss, huh?" "Nope," she said, eyes sparkling. "You'll be the fixer. I'll be the one who makes people believe in us." They high-fived. Her tiny hand against his calloused palm. But 2 days later, David collapsed. The hospital was noisy and cold. Doctors spoke in low voices. Sophie sat by his bed with her sketchbook in her lap. David tried to sit up, coughed, then motioned to the side drawer. "Take the portfolio," he whispered. "Go to SummitCore. Tell them I still want to work." Sophie's eyes welled. "But I'm just a kid." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, but you're my kid." Now, back in the boardroom, Sophie blinked. Michael had asked her a question, but she'd been lost in the memory. "I'm sorry, what?" "I said, did your father really want to work here?" he asked. "At this company?" Sophie nodded. "He said machines don't scare him. People do. But he said he'd face anything for me." Michael leaned back. He wasn't used to this, conversations that felt real. That mattered. He looked at her drawing on the last page of the portfolio. A hand-drawn logo, a smiling wrench with the words "Miller and Daughter, fixing what's broken." "Did you make this?" he asked. She nodded again, smiling for the first time. "It's for our future." Michael stared at it. For a moment, the numbers in his world faded. The balance sheets, the graphs, the emails, they all felt meaningless compared to this little sketch made in colored pencil. He stood, walked to the window, and stared at the city. "You know," he said slowly, "when I was your age, I thought CEOs were superheroes." Now I'm not so sure. Sophie tilted her head. Well, maybe some just forget their capes. He turned to look at her. The air felt different now. I can't promise anything, he said. But I want to meet your father. And thank you for showing up. Sophie smiled, gripping the folder close. She didn't know what this meant yet, but it felt like something had shifted. Not just in the room. In the man himself. Some children wait for toys. Sophie waited for a miracle. She sat quietly in the corner of the hospital room, sketchbook on her lap, knees pulled to her chest. Her ribbon had come loose. Her shoes, scuffed from city sidewalks, barely touched the floor. She watched the 4 drip like it was counting down the moments she had left to fix everything. But children shouldn't have to fix anything. 2 hours earlier, Michael Anderson had entered the room like he entered every negotiation, measured, composed, unshaken. He wasn't ready for what he saw. David Miller wasn't just sick. He was struggling to breathe between sentences, yet he smiled like he didn't want his daughter to see the pain. Tubes, machines, tired eyes, none of it stopped him from extending a trembling hand. Thank you, he rasped, for meeting my little girl. She believes in people. That's her thing. Michael sat down, not out of habit, but because the weight of the moment demanded it. I read your resume, Michael said softly. Impressive experience. David gave a short nod. Until I got too tired to lift a wrench. Michael hesitated. Why didn't you ask for help? David looked past him, toward the window. Because asking means someone might say no. That silence wasn't empty. It was full of things neither man had the courage to name: shame, fear, pride. Sophie, sitting quietly nearby, suddenly stood up and whispered, I'll be right back. She walked out of the room without a sound. No tears, just that heavy quiet children carry when they're trying not to break in front of grown-ups. Outside in the hallway, Sophie pressed her forehead against the cool glass of a vending machine. She stared at the snacks she couldn't afford. Her hands stayed tucked in her cardigan sleeves. She wasn't hungry for chips. She just wanted something normal. Behind her, a nurse approached with gentle steps. You okay, sweetheart? Sophie nodded, eyes still fixed on the candy bars. Do you think dads can get better if someone believes in them enough? The nurse blinked, taken aback by the question. Then smiled. I think sometimes that's exactly what they need. Back in the hospital room, David was struggling to hide a cough. Michael reached for the water pitcher and poured a cup. It wasn't the gesture that mattered, it was the quiet shift. Michael Anderson, the CEO who once calculated time and profits per minute, was now watching a father try to breathe. She loves you deeply, Michael said. David gave a weak laugh. I know. She deserves someone stronger. You showed up every day for her, Michael added. That's strength. David met his eyes, voice barely above a whisper. So what now? Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up Sophie's drawing from the bedside table. The logo. The smiley wrench. The dream. Miller and daughter, Michael read aloud. Fixing what's broken. David smiled, tears threatening. She made that for me. Said we'd start a company when I got better. Said we'd fix things, people too. Michael stood. Maybe she already started it. Moments later, Sophie returned, holding a juice box and an origami bird folded from a hospital brochure. She placed it gently on the nightstand. "I made you a lucky bird," she said. "They fly away from sadness." Michael watched the little girl lean over the bed, adjusting her father's blanket with practiced care. Not rushed. Not frantic. Just full of love. It was too much. Too much for a child to bear. Too much for a man to ignore. As they said goodbye, Sophie turned to Michael once more. "Do you fix things too?" she asked. "I'm learning," he replied. And for the first time in years, he meant it. It started with a crumpled drawing on a CEO's desk and ended with a promise. Michael Anderson stared at the little paper bird Sophie had left behind. It rested beside her drawing, the smiling wrench, the words "fixing what's broken." Those weren't just doodles. They were blueprints for something he hadn't built in years: connection. And for the first time, that cold corner office didn't feel powerful. It felt hollow. The next morning, Michael arrived at the office before sunrise. The building was still. His footsteps echoed as he walked past rows of silent cubicles. He didn't head straight to his desk. Instead, he entered the HR floor. A place he hadn't visited in years. "Pull David Miller's file," he said to the startled assistant. "I want everything. Skills, certifications, past evaluations." An hour later, a thick folder lay in front of him. Michael opened it. Page after page showed a man who worked hard, stayed late, trained others, and never once filed a complaint. And yet, he disappeared from the system without a word. Michael closed the file. Something was broken. And it wasn't just David. At noon, Michael visited the machine floor. He hadn't walked through those halls since the ribbon cutting years ago. The air smelled like grease and steel. Workers paused when they saw him. He waved them off. "Just looking." At the end of the line, an old technician named Ray looked up. "Boss," he asked, confused. "You ever work with David Miller?" Michael asked. Ray nodded. "Yeah. Quiet guy. Fast hands. Knew machines like they were people." "Why'd he leave?" Ray hesitated. "He got sick. Didn't want pity. Said he'd come back when he could. Never did." Michael looked down at the concrete floor. "Would you hire him again?" "In a heartbeat," Ray said. "He was one of the best." Back upstairs, Michael sat in his office. Sunlight poured through the windows, but he didn't feel warm. He opened the portfolio again, pulled out the final page. Sophie's note was still there, written in crooked letters. "Thank you for listening. My daddy is really good at fixing stuff. He fixed our fan with just a shoelace once." He smiled. "A real one." Then picked up the phone. That evening, Michael returned to the hospital. Sophie was curled beside her father, coloring. She looked up when he walked in. "Hi," she said softly. "I have news," he replied. David sat up slowly. "Good or bad?" Michael stepped closer. "David, you're rehired." David blinked. "What?" "Part-time, remote for now," Michael continued. "You'll start with diagnostics. Tech consulting. We'll ease you in." Sophie gasped. "Really?" Michael nodded. "Your daughter made a better pitch than any adult I've met. David swallowed hard. I don't know what to say. You already did, Michael said. You showed up. She believed in you. Sophie jumped off the chair, ran to Michael, and hugged his legs tightly. He froze, then slowly placed a hand on her shoulder. It wasn't just about the job. It was about the girl who refused to let her father disappear. Later, as Michael walked toward the elevator, Sophie ran after him. Wait. He turned. Yes? She held up a folded paper. It's a spare lucky bird. Just in case you ever feel sad. He took it, unsure what to say. Thank you, he finally whispered. And as the elevator doors closed, he stared down at the tiny origami in his hand. It didn't fix anything. But it felt like the start of something that might. What do you give the child who gave your soul back to you? That was the question Michael Anderson kept asking himself. Not in a boardroom. Not during a strategy call. But late at night, staring at the small paper bird on his desk. Because no bonus, no stock option, no victory ever made him feel what Sophie's hug had stirred in him, the feeling that he mattered, not as a CEO, but as a human being. 1 week passed. David Miller had begun working remotely from the hospital ward. Michael arranged for a temporary workstation and software access. Each day, he'd log in, quietly assist the engineers, and review old system blueprints. Feels like I never left, David messaged one afternoon. You didn't, came the reply from Michael. Meanwhile, Sophie continued her daily rituals, juice box at 2 o'clock, storytime with Dad at 4 o'clock, lucky bird check at 6 o'clock. She watched the screens light up around his bed. Watched his voice grow stronger. And every time she saw his hands typing again, her eyes shone just a little brighter. Michael, however, was wrestling with something else. At the next executive meeting, he pulled up a slide no one expected. Employee Reintegration Program, the title read. He looked around the room of polished suits. David Miller was one of us, Michael began. Illness shouldn't be a sentence to disappear. An awkward pause followed. Are we talking charity? One director asked. Michael's gaze sharpened. No, he said. We're talking humanity. And that's when it changed. Not just policies. Culture. Because when a CEO speaks from truth instead of spreadsheets, people listen differently. That afternoon, Michael visited the hospital again, this time with something more than words. He walked into the room carrying a box. Sophie looked up from her coloring book. What's that? She asked. A surprise, he smiled. For you and your dad. David raised an eyebrow. Michael opened the box slowly. Inside, a framed certificate with SummitCore's logo, but rewritten with a twist. Miller and Daughter Division, fixing what matters. Official internal initiative to restore opportunity, dignity, and forgotten potential. Sophie gasped. Is that real? As real as you, Michael said gently. David's voice cracked. You named it after us? Michael nodded. Because you started it. I'm just following your lead. In that moment, no one spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because hearts were too full to speak. Sophie climbed into her dad's lap. He held the frame with trembling fingers, blinking hard. And Michael? He sat on the edge of the hospital bed. No title. No power suit. Just a man who had been changed. Later that evening, as Michael left the hospital, the receptionist waved. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. Michael smiled. "Probably." She winked. "You know, we're all talking about you. About the little girl who walked into your office." He chuckled. "She didn't just walk in. She rewrote the entire script." Upstairs, Sophie and David sat under dim lights. She held her lucky bird. He held her hand. "Daddy," she whispered, "does this mean we fixed something?" David smiled, kissing her forehead. "Sweetheart, I think we fixed everything. Not every child leaves footprints in a building, some leave them on people's hearts." Months passed. SummitCore's newest initiative, Miller and Daughter Division, quietly grew, not in headlines, but in hope. Displaced workers returned. Retired hands retooled. And in every onboarding folder sat a tiny printed paper bird, folded in the corner. Sophie's bird. David was home now. Not cured, but better. Stronger. He worked from the kitchen table, a cup of tea always nearby, Sophie's drawing now framed above his monitor. Some days were hard. But they were his. One Friday afternoon, Sophie walked through SummitCore's glass doors, not as a surprise guest this time, but as someone expected. Michael greeted her in the lobby with a warm grin. She wore a new dress. Same ribbon. Same smile. "This is for you," she said, handing him another sketch, this time of him. It showed a tall figure, no cape, but a paper bird in his hand. The label read, "The Man Who Listened." Michael looked at it for a long moment. No words came. Just a quiet breath. "Come on," he finally said. "I've got something to show you." They walked down the executive hallway, turning into a small room freshly painted and filled with light. On the wall, photos of past employees. Workers who'd returned. People who mattered again. At the center, a glass case. Inside, a copy of the portfolio Sophie had carried that first day. And next to it, the original paper bird. "Is that?" Sophie whispered. Michael nodded. "We call it the Turning Point Room." "Why?" "Because that's what you gave us." That night, back at home, Sophie helped her dad wash dishes. The sink was full. The window cracked open to let the breeze in. "I like today," she said softly. David smiled. "Me too." She dried a plate. Then looked at him. "Do you think one person can really change things?" David dried his hands, knelt down, and looked her in the eyes. "I think one little girl already did." And far away, in a quiet office glowing with evening light, Michael placed Sophie's new drawing into a frame. He set it beside his awards. Not for show, but as a reminder that some legacies aren't built on profit margins. They're built on paper birds, worn portfolios, and the courage of a child who dared to walk into the unknown. If this story touched your heart, remember, kindness has a ripple effect. You never know whose life your compassion might quietly change. Subscribe for more true-hearted stories that remind us of the power in small, brave acts. And if you know a Sophie in your life, tell them you matter more than you know.